Yeah, there we go. Happy Mother's Day, and it's great to be able to celebrate with you, and we thank God for our mothers and for our spiritual mothers in Christ. That being said, if your mother is here on this side of heaven with you today, you need to give her a call, and you need to tell her you love her. Next, our children are dismissed. I'm proud of myself. I didn't have to be prompted today. I'm growing. So any children can go out and go to children's ministry now. Turn with me to the book of Mark, chapter 4. And today we're going to look at one of my favorite portions of the gospel. It's a portion that shows us who Jesus is, but shows us in a very dramatic way who Jesus is. And it has several implications for us as Christians, as followers of Christ. And as you're turning there, I want to just dip a toe into current events. So some of you may be right now taking a break this morning from perusing the UFO files that the government released this week. And one of my favorite shows for years has been the X-Files. If you've ever watched the X-Files, I highly recommend it. And at one time, I have it somewhere, but at one time I had a poster on my wall that Katrina got for me. It was Mulder's poster. It says, "I want to believe." I didn't have that up necessarily because I was a UFO fanatic. I had it up because I was a fan of the show. But there are a lot of people who really, really want to believe. And when you want to believe something, you lean into it. That's true for us as Christians. When we see who Jesus is, we want to understand him. We want to understand his word. We lean in. But right now there's a lot of discussion about extraterrestrial life. Have we been visited? Will we be visited by extraterrestrial life? Well, I'll just give you my real opinion on that. If there were anything significant in those files, the government would not release them for you. That's my honest opinion. But I think if we're concerned about extraterrestrial life, we have to realize that we ultimately have an extraterrestrial faith. What I mean by that is our Lord came to us from heaven, from beyond this world, outside of this world, as creator of this world. And one of the things he does, and we see in the passage today, is he confronts the forces of Satan. And we certainly do deal with celestial forces of an evil nature. We know that God dispatches his celestial angels to aid us, but we know that God himself has interrupted human history in Jesus Christ to give us an otherworldly salvation, to prepare us for a world yet to come. And so while I wouldn't be too worried about little green men, we need to look to the one man that came to deliver us from this world, to take us to the next. But this passage draws our attention to his conflict with Satan's forces, true invaders of this world, responsible for every evil, responsible for every vice, for every sin. Satan himself sowing the seed in the Garden of Eden. But I want you to look today as we see Jesus confronting the forces of Satan, and I want you to see our role in that. So what you have here, I want to start in Mark chapter 4 and verse 35. Jesus has been teaching the parable discourse. He's been teaching by the sea. And when he finishes teaching, he says to his disciples, "I want you to get in a boat with me. We're going somewhere." And it's evening at this point, so they're taking an evening sail across the Sea of Galilee. And that's where we pick up in verse 35. "On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" Now that last question carries everything we're going to talk about today. Who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? And I want you to notice here in this passage that the storm reveals what the disciples don't know about Jesus. The storm reveals what they don't know. Now, there's a lot that we can learn there from our experience. Storms reveal what we believe. Life storms, trials, death-threatening experiences reveal to us what we really think, what we really believe. Adrian Rogers once said this: if you want to know what a man is full of or what a person is full of, shake him and see what spills out. And right here, the disciples are shaken, and what we begin to see is they have some doubt and some misgivings about Jesus that spills out of them. But what you have here is you have Jesus calling his disciples to follow him. And we know he's already chosen the 12. And he says, let us go across to the other side. And they've been following Jesus wherever he goes, but now they're going into new territory. They're actually going across the Sea of Galilee. And all you got to do is look at the maps in the back of your Bible or Google the map, and you can see that if you go east across the Sea of Galilee, you leave Israel and you go into the other side, and this is Gentile area. And over there you had certain regions. You had the region of Gadara, which is where they're going. You had a place called the Decapolis, which we'll read about, called the 10 cities. There were 10 cities there. But where Jesus is going, he's going boldly where he's not gone before, and he's going into Gentile territory. And the disciples are faithfully following him and coming. And that phrase, let us go across to the other side, I think frames the way that Jesus looks at us. Let us go. Follow me. We're going to the other side. Just like God led the children of Israel through the Red Sea, under Moses, he leads us into uncertain places, and we follow him. So they leave the crowd. Again, another example of Jesus leaving behind his booming ministry and the crowds who love him. They leave them, they get in the boat, and they start off, and a great windstorm arises. Now that phrase, windstorm, in Greek, it appears twice, and it appears in this gospel, Mark, and it appears in another gospel, I believe it's Luke. It refers to the same story, and it's a word that's often translated as hurricane. So this is a really, really big storm. This is not just some little rainstorm. And now these men, many of them anyway, Peter, James, Andrew, and John, what did they do for a living? They were fishermen. They were fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. This was known territory to them, and they are terrified, and they're shaking in their boat. The Sea of Galilee, it is very low, below sea level, and it is surrounded by these mountains and cliffs, steep inclines, and the geography there actually lends itself to sudden storms coming very quickly. And that's exactly what's happening here. This isn't something that's out of the norm, but it is definitely extreme. And it is such that these fishermen who know the sea, who know the large lake, it's called the sea, they're terrified. The waves were breaking into the boat was already filling. Now notice, this is a serious scenario. If your boat's filling with water in the middle of a hurricane, that's notable. That's worth taking note of. And Jesus is sleeping on the cushion. This is a ballast that would keep the boat steady. He's sleeping on that, using it as a pillow. And they wake him up and they say, "Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing, that we're dying here?" Now I want you to notice something about what they say. They don't ask him to save them. They don't say, "Lord, we know, please stop this hurricane." They even address him as teacher. They're relating to him as the teacher. And it almost reads as though, what are you doing sleeping? Help us pitch some water out of this thing. Don't you care what's going on? You've led us here. We followed you. And now look what a mess we're in. Now, there's something to learn there, Christian. And do you know why God doesn't give us foresight? Do you know why God sometimes calls us and does not tell us what lies ahead? Because many of us would not get in the boat. I don't want to know the future. I don't want to know it. I want to experience it the way God intends. The truth of the matter is, if you follow Jesus, you will follow him onto stormy seas. If you lean in and say, "My life belongs to the Lord, I'm going to live as he would have me live. I'm going to act as he would have me act. I'm going to serve as he would have me serve. I'm going to go where he would tell me to go." He's not going to sail you away from storms. Now, I want you to think about this. There are the storms of life that come to all of us. Every one of us, just by living our lives, run into times when we think we're going to sink, times when we think we're not going to make it. But I'm going to tell you, there are going to be special times that come because of living the Christian life, because you're not just going up against the random frustrations of this world. You're sailing against the winds of this world, and you're sailing against the will of Satan and his demons. I think this storm, the text doesn't explicitly say it, but I think what comes next, I think there's good support here that Satan himself has whipped up this storm in an attempt to end the ministry of the Messiah. That's what I think. I don't think this storm is neutral. I think this storm is satanic. And I think Jesus is going into it headlong and bringing his disciples with him. We know that he calls us to take our cross and follow him. If you follow Jesus and you get in the boat with him, you will sail into storms. You will sail into storms because you got in the boat with him. Because Jesus is not a neutral character. He generates response. He generates friction because he leads us against this world. And so these disciples, they respond like what we would think any human being ought to respond. Hey, we're dying here. If there's anything you can do about this, Jesus, please wake up. Please help us. I'll make one note here. Jesus is the anti-Jonah. Now, if you're reading this, you should be seeing some Jonah connections. Where is Jesus going? He's sailing east to Gentiles. That's where we're going. We're going to Gadara, where Legion is, where Gentiles are. What did Jonah do? He sailed west away from Gentiles. God called him to go preach to Gentiles, and he sails west away from them. Jesus is going east to meet them. Both of them are in a storm. Jonah delivers the men from the storm by succumbing to the righteous judgment of God, and Jesus stills the storm by exercising the power of God. Where Jonah was rebellious to the call to go preach to outsiders, Jesus is going to preach to outsiders. Jonah's storm was the judgment of God. I think Jesus' storm is the warfare of Satan. They wake him up and they say, Jesus, don't you care? And so Jesus wakes up, and the first thing he does is he rebukes the sea. And he rebukes the wind, and he speaks to the sea, and he says, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Now notice here, he rebukes the sea. Again, I think this lends itself to a satanic attack. Jesus is, you rebuke people, right? You rebuke people who can understand what a rebuke is. And Jesus is rebuking, he's commanding this stormy sea to be quiet and to calm down. And the Bible says there was a great calm, a great calm. Now, those words are, it's an intensified phrase. The word calm already means calm, but a great calm. Now, we think about a great noise. Sometimes you hear something, man, that was a great noise. That was a huge, loud noise. But this is a great calm. This is a calm that is so calm that it deserves an adjective. The idea here is that Jesus takes it from a hurricane down to a glassy lake surface. A great calm in an instant. That's what Jesus does. That's what he's able to do. Because he is the master and the maker of the sea and of nature and of the wind and of the storm. And Jesus looks at the disciples and he says, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Now I want you to notice the disciples, I don't know if you call it a rebuke, but the disciples' approach to Jesus, how biting it is, and how equally harsh Jesus' response is. The disciples say, don't you care that we're dying? There's an insult buried in that phrase, isn't there? Jesus, you're our shepherd, you're our Lord, and you're just going to let us die. You don't care what happens to us. How many times have you been tempted to pray that when you've gone into trial? Lord, do you even care? Lord, are you even listening? Don't you see the boat is filling with water? Don't you care? There is teeth in their question. And Jesus responds with an equal response. Have you no faith? Now, you'll read in the Gospels many times when Jesus calls the disciples those of little faith. He uses that phrase a lot. You of little faith. Do you have so little faith? But here he doesn't even say that. He says, do you have no faith at all? Do you absolutely have no faith? Now, let's get in the middle of that as Christians today and think about that for a minute. The boat was filling with water. This was a remarkable storm. On a human level, this should register on the anxiety scale. But Jesus doesn't get up and say, guys, I understand. I know it looked bad. I'm sorry I was sleeping. I understand why you got turned around there. It looked like we were going down. He doesn't do that. He says, don't you have any faith at all? Don't you have any faith at all? You might say, why in the world would you respond like that? I mean, I wouldn't respond to you like that. But Jesus responds to his followers like that. And there's a reason for that. This great calm. Look at this. The great calm. Jesus asked them, do you have no faith? In verse 41, they were filled with great fear. I want you to notice there, it's the same word, great. Great calm and great fear. Now, Jesus says, why were you afraid? Now, when he says, why were you afraid, it's a word that means timidity or cowardice. They were wanting to go back. They were timid. But when we're told here that they have great fear, the idea here is that the fear they have after the storm is of a different and even greater kind of fear than they had during the storm. Folks, as we saw when we went through Exodus and we saw God saving his people, we saw that God himself, his salvation, was more terrifying than the bondage of the Egyptians. Because the logic is, if our God can do this, and we've been oppressed by the Egyptians, now we're under him. And they come to Sinai and he terrifies them. And that's the same experience these disciples have. If we were in a hurricane and it got really still, we'd be like, oh, thank the Lord. What a relief. But when you see a man who you have followed as teacher, he's been a healer, he's cast out demons, and now he just yanks creation around and it does what he says to do, they're not afraid of the calm, and they've forgotten about the storm. They're filled with great fear because they don't know who they're in the boat with. And they ask the question and they say, who is this then that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now let that fall on you for a minute. These are Jesus' followers. These are the ones who he said, follow me, and they've followed him. These are the ones who've seen him cast out demons. They've seen him heal the sick. They've seen him make people who can't walk again. They've heard his wisdom and his teaching, but now they see him in a completely different light. They see him as master of creation. And they ask a question. Who is this? Doesn't that seem like a bizarre question? They've been with him all that time, and now they ask, who is this man? I don't even know who he is. You'd think they'd be further along than that. You think if you get in a boat with somebody, you'd know him. And they thought they did. Why is this significant? Well, there's a lot to be said about God calming our storms. There's a lot to be said about Jesus giving us peace. But I want you to notice here, if that's the way we go with this text, we miss the point of it. Jesus didn't give them peace. He created a disturbance. He calmed the storm, but he troubled the disciples. Why? Why did it trouble the disciples? I think it troubled the disciples because they knew their Old Testament. Several times. There are dozens and dozens of verses that talk about God ruling the sea. You don't have to look any further than the Red Sea to see that God makes a way through the sea. And that's exactly what Jesus does here. But there are many, many passages that make reference to God commanding the sea. And I want to share one with you. I don't want to divert too far away. But in Psalm 107, there's a portion of a psalm that is especially relevant for what has just happened here. The psalm writer says, some went down to the sea in ships. They saw the deeds of the Lord, for he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters are quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Now that reads as though it could have been written 5 minutes after this, doesn't it? Instead of hundreds of years before it. Hundreds of years before, this psalm writer talked about God, Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, doing this. And what happens here to the disciples? They find themselves living this psalm. And guess who's playing the role of Yahweh? God. Jesus is. I think the light has begun to turn on for them. They know Jesus as the miracle man. They know him as the healer. They know him as the teacher. They believe he's the Messiah. But now they have seen him step in and do what God does. And the question they ask is, who are we in the boat with? Who are we in the boat with? And Christian, you will sail the sea of the Christian life when you understand who you're in the boat with. When you get to the place that you have more awe of the captain of your ship than you do the storm you're sailing through, you're on your way to being a good disciple. Jesus rebukes them because they've been with him all this time and they still don't know who he is. Now I want you to let that question hang for a minute when they ask, who is this? That phrase, 3 words, who is this? These are the insiders. These are the Jewish disciples who have been with Jesus. Let that question linger in your mind for a moment. They ask, who is this? We're about to go into another storm. Chapter 5. Now notice, this is the same story. This is not a different story. And there's a man that is possessed with demons, and he's perhaps the most extreme case that we've seen. He's not just possessed with demons and roaming around the synagogue back in Galilee. Now understand, this is not Jewish territory. This is Gentile pagan territory. And here Satan has claimed this poor man. And when you read this, don't read this as though he is some overtly wicked person more than others. What you need to see is he is a victim of the power of Satan. No one would want to live like this. No mother would want to see her child live like this. But nevertheless, here he is. He has an unclean spirit, and he lives in the tombs. He lives in an unclean place with unclean spirits, and he lives where the dead are because he's not fit for the living. No one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. So this man is a superman. He cannot be bound. He breaks chains. He'd often been bound with shackles, we see, but he would tear them apart, and he'd break the shackles in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Now that word subdue, other translations render it this way, and it's a better translation. It's actually the word for tame that's used for taming wild animals. That word is used here on purpose because this man is living as a wild animal, yet he can't be tamed. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. Most people wake up to the sound of a rooster, but you'd wake up here, if you lived in this town, to the sound of a screaming man in the tombs. No doubt he cast a pall over the entire area. And we find out he's cutting himself. Self-harm. He's driven to madness, demonization, wildness, outside of society, and self-harm. Satan wants to destroy people. He wants to tear them down. And that's exactly what's happening to this man. No person would choose this life. Satan has foisted upon him. Jesus here comes to an unclean place, to an unclean man. And notice in verse 2, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. And notice as we go on into verse 6, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. He doesn't run away. Society pushes him away, but he sees Jesus and he runs to Jesus and he falls down. And this is the demonic at work in him. The demons recognize Jesus, they run to him, they confront him. Now, really quick, do you remember that question that I told you to keep in your mind? What was that question? It was 3 words. And who asked it? The disciples. What did they ask? Who is this man? What is the first thing you see this wild man say? What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me. Question asked, question answered. Jesus' closest followers say, who is this man? And the demons of hell come running on the shore and say, you're Jesus, Son of the Most High God. They not only know that he is God incarnate, he is the Son of God, he is the eternal one, they know his personal given name. They're well acquainted with him. Jesus has been tearing down and dismantling Satan's kingdom. He's been casting out demons, and no doubt word has spread in the demonic world. But the demons know the Lord. They know God. They know their judge. James tells us that we believe in one God and we do well, but the demons believe and they tremble. Church, the demons have superior theology to any of us. The demons have beyond PhDs in theology. They're seeing from the other side of things, the things that we don't know, they see. They've been around longer than we have. They've seen God face to face. They know things we don't know. They knew who Jesus was, even when the disciples were still learning. They recognized Jesus not only as the Son of God, but they recognize him as their judge. And they say, do not torment me. Now, why do I keep saying they? We're reading the singular pronoun here, me. What have you to do with me? But notice what happens in verse 8. Jesus has come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And Jesus asked him, what is your name? They know his name. Jesus says, what is your name? And he replied, singular, he replied, my singular name is Legion, for we are many. My name is Legion, for we are many. Now, the word legion referred to a military group of about 6,000 soldiers. That's what legion meant, and it meant about 6,000 soldiers. And this man doesn't respond with a proper name. No, I don't think any mother would look down in the eyes of their son and say, what are you going to name him? Name him Legion. Nobody would do that. That would be bizarre. It would be strange. Now, I know some babies are named some weird stuff, but I'm going to name him Legion because one of these days he's going to have so many demons in him. No, nobody would do that. He responds not with who he is. He responds with what he is. He is a pandemonium of devils of hell, and he is a capital city on planet Earth of demonic activity. He has a war going on inside him, and he is losing. And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." Notice the posture of these demons. They're not railing and warring against Jesus. They're begging him. They're asking him permission. Jesus is sovereign Lord and judge over the demons, and they know this. They beg him, "Please, don't send us away to another country. Please, let us go into these pigs, if nothing else. See those pigs, let us go there." Now, we don't have time to flesh out a theology of demons today, but Jesus tells us in another place that unclean spirits, when they're cast out, they walk through dry places seeking rest, and if they can, they go back and inhabit the old person that they used to dwell in. Now, there's a lot going on here, but I think at the end of the day we can learn this, that demons like to have a home. They like to have a place. They like to have people. They want control, and they don't want to be judged. Now, what happens to these demons once they're cast out? Perhaps they get chained with many others who are already chained, as the scriptures tell us in the lowest hell. There are some that are already chained there. Perhaps that's where they go. Perhaps they run loose and pester someone else. But they see a confrontation of Jesus as their end. So he gives them permission. The unclean spirits come out. They go into the pigs. And the herd, about 2,000 pigs, that's a lot of pigs. So again, legion, about 6,000 demons, you get 2,000 pigs. They overrun the pigs. What has happened to the man has now happened to the pigs. But they don't run to the tombs, they run into the sea, and they go down the bank. And what a sight that would have been. 2,000 pigs piling up on the rocks, drowning in the ocean. Well, not the ocean, the lake. It's in the lake, it's not an ocean. Drowning in the lake. What a stink. And what a blow to the economy. Now, Jesus comes to an unclean place, to unclean people, to cast out unclean spirits into unclean animals. As you know, pigs were unclean to the Jews. And not only were they forbidden by the Jewish dietary law, they also had cultural significance. Because a couple hundred years before this, there had been an invading army that had come in to Jerusalem and forced the priests to offer pigs sacrifice on the altar and forced many Jewish people to eat pigs. They did this to desecrate them, to humiliate them. Pigs were not only something that were forbidden by God, they also had just a general bad taste in their mouth, no pun intended, toward pigs and toward their usage, toward the pig husbandry. And Jesus drives these animals into the Sea of Galilee. I want you to think about this for a moment. You are more safe in the middle of a hurricane on the sea with Jesus than you are happily grazing on a sunny day on the hillside. You see, Jesus saved his disciples from the sea, and he cast the demons into the sea. Think of the Lake Galilee, the Sea of Galilee. Think of it as the judgment of God. God saves us from going down, but he casts our enemies into judgment. He's the master of the sea. He doesn't need a hurricane to drown pigs. Now, I want you to think about this. So far what we've read, it folds into two halves, and it's really simple. Question asked, question answered. All of the storm and the drama around it shows us this, that the disciples don't yet know who Jesus is. He's showing who he is. The demons know who he is, and Jesus conquers the demons. Now, the rest of it shows us something very important. When we truly know who Jesus is, we will truly be able to follow him. What happens next? Well, the herdsmen fled and told it in the city. So the herdsmen are seeing this. Their eyes are big as saucers. They are amazed. They go into the city and into the country, and people came to see what it was that happened. And they came to see Jesus, and they saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and he began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. I want you to notice a few things here. Number one, you remember what happened to the disciples? Jesus calmed the storm, and then they got scared. The townspeople, Jesus calms the demon-possessed man, and then they get scared. Notice this. The disciples, when there was a great calm, they were filled with great fear. Notice what happens here. When they saw, it didn't say when they saw the dead pigs. It says when they saw the demon-possessed man, they were afraid. They saw him sitting and clothed in his right mind. You see, here's the thing. The power of Jesus is frightening. Now, you would think this would be a win for everybody. They've been listening to this wailing man screaming. They've been telling their kids, don't go by the graveyard. There's a crazy man out there. They've tried to bind him. He is a terror to all. He is the quintessential horror movie. And they see him sitting with clothes on for the first time in forever, having a rational conversation, well-behaved, well-mannered. And that's when the townspeople get afraid. You see, they had gotten so used to hell, they didn't know what to do with the drop of heaven. And the disciples, the storm they could make sense of. But this man who lassos the storm and breaks it and calms it, they don't have a category for him. He calms the storm. The disciples are afraid. He calms Legion, and the townspeople are afraid. I also want you to notice all the begging that happens here. The demons came out of the tombs and met Jesus, and they begged him to send them away into the pigs. The townspeople come out of the town, met Jesus, and they begged him to leave. And then as he's leaving, this man comes to Jesus and begs him to let him come to him. But everybody knows that Jesus is Lord. And we actually end exactly where we started. We started in verse 35 when Jesus told the disciples, let's go across the lake. And they got in a boat. And we end with Jesus getting in a boat, going across a lake. But now there's a plus one. This man comes and he begs Jesus, please, let me come with you. And Jesus says, no, you can't come with me. I want you to stay here. And I want you to go home. And I want you to tell your family, I want you to tell your friends what the Lord has done for you. And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. The Decapolis means the 10 cities. It's kind of like saying the Tri-City area. It's kind of like saying the 10-city area. 10 cities this man goes on, and he tells them what Jesus has done for him. Arguably, this man had more impact where he was than he would have been across the sea, across the lake. No one knew him over there. But when they see this wild man restored, healthy, having conversations, clothed, everyone's going to ask, what happened? What happened? What a powerful, powerful testimony. Don't despise what the Lord has done in your life. I hear some people say, well, you know, I was a Christian. I was raised from a very young age. You know, I was saved as a child and lived my entire life as a Christian, and I just don't have a very dramatic testimony. You know, and they'll say, well, so others have a very powerful testimony, and people can see their before and their after, and I just kind of always grew up in church. Number one, don't despise that. Peter, James, Andrew, and John, good Jewish men that grew up going to synagogue, grew up as believers in Yahweh, probably knew Psalm 107. That's why they were so messed up here. If God saves you at a young age, that is the grace of God. Because you don't have to experience something for God to have saved you from it. But I hear sometimes people will say, well, man, I came to the Lord late in life, and I messed so much up, and so many opportunities I blew, and so many bridges I burned. God can use you to tell His story in a powerful way. Everyone can sing and tell of the deliverance of God. Wherever Jesus has met you, whether you be a fisherman and He says, come and follow me, or whether you be a demon-possessed maniac that Jesus puts in your right mind and says, follow me, we all are called to get in the boat. It's just Legion's boat took him back on land. There's something to be said about this man. The disciples, still struggling with who Jesus is, terrified of what He can do, and they say, who is this man? If you'll notice in this passage, the disciples seem to have more in common with the townspeople than they have with Legion. This man who was probably not well acquainted with the religion of the Jews, this man who was a pagan, this man who, whatever he knew, he hadn't known it in years. This man who was a Gentile, no doubt uncircumcised, even in his best days, he was unclean. And what does he do? He says, Jesus, let me go with you. Please, Jesus, I want to be with you. Now you might say, well, he's riding the high of just having been delivered. No, that's not true. The Bible describes him as clothed and in his right mind. You go to make an important legal decision, a lot of times you'll be asked, have you had any alcohol or anything like this? Or I being of sound mind and body. This man was making the most clear-headed decision of his life. Because you don't get more clear-headed than when Jesus clears you and gives you a renewed mind. These disciples were on the sea, and they were not of sound mind and body. These men on the sea were driven to the edge of their senses, thinking they were going to die. And they said, who is this man? And here is Legion, thinking as clearly as he's ever thought, and saying, I want to sail into the storm with this guy. I know who he is, and I know what he's done. Follow where he goes, or go where he sends. Almost. Church, I want you to think about this for a moment. We need today as a church to walk away with that first question the disciples asked. And we need to walk away with a boat prepared and waiting on us. What sort of man is this that the wind and the seas obey him? You can add to that. What sort of man is this that the winds and the seas and 6,000 demons obey him? I want you to think about that. That's the ultimate question. That is the crux of your Christian life. Who is this man? And how should I relate to him? Who is this man that commands creation, commands demons? There's not a one of us that can command the weather. If we could, it would have been 80 degrees 2 months ago and stayed right there. Not a one of us can control it. We're at the mercy of the elements. But this man commands creation and it snaps to. This man commands demons and they exit. They go into pigs. And that ought to be behind the question of discipleship. Who is this man? Jesus makes claims on us that no human teacher should make. Take up your cross, follow me. Leave family and follow me. Let the dead bury their dead and follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Come with me. No man makes those claims except Jesus. And the question, church, that you have to answer is this. If Jesus commands the winds and they stop blowing, if he commands the sea and it stops moving, and he commands the demons and they submit, then who are you to hear him say, follow me, and disobey. If all creation obeys the Master, who are you to rebel? Who is this man? When you can answer that question, you can follow him into the storm. You can weather the storm. You can follow him where he goes. You can go where he sends. Church, today is the day to get in the boat with Jesus and say, Lord, wherever you lead me, I will go.